Welcome to another episode of the Robinson-Hewitt Pod. This is where we talk about the future of technology and what it means to be human in the next era of tech. I'm your host, Alison Mackey. I'm a futurist, anthropologist of emerging technology, and founder of Robinson-Hewitt Consulting. Welcome. So over the years, I have heard my fair share of people talking about emerging technology, specifically AI, as if it exists somewhere outside of nature. Like it's this layer on top of everything, and it doesn't exist within our own natural structure. But every data center being built right now sits on our land. It pulls from our water resources and it consumes our energy. And it can also create abject waste. So with all of that in mind, it is physical. It has weight to it and it also has consequences. So if you think about it like that, some types of technologies aren't actually that far removed from nature. And if you also know a little thing or two about the intersection of science, math, and the natural world, you'll know that it has never actually been separate. And that framing of thinking changes everything about how we view technology right now. Because if that's true, if there is no separation between technology and the natural world, then the decisions being made right now about how we build it, those aren't just technical decisions. They are decisions about our own home and the planet. And right now, most of those decisions are being made by a very small percentage of people on behalf of a planet of billions. And let's not forget the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom as well. And all of those creatures that live in the ocean. It's not just humans that occupy this planet. It's so much more than us. So my background in emerging technology is actually rooted in sustainable tech. And if you know what we do here at RHC, you also know that we have the Water Project, where we're building new systems for water management and water technology for an equitable future of water for all. And because I live within this liminal space where I love emerging technology, but I'm also an anthropologist with a focus in environmentalism. So I hold the space between these two areas. And it's led me to hold this belief that our resources are naturally abundant. Everything that we need is within this planet that we live on, but we're just not managing them properly. And our technology, as it is currently being used, is incredibly harmful. But there is a way of ensuring that both live in harmony, where each balance each other out and both benefit from each other. So a lot of my work, including the Water Project that we're currently building, starts with people and planet first, and then the technology gets designed around that, and not the other way around. And when you take it from that perspective, it completely changes the game. And if you saw our last episode on the art of perception, and you'll remember that I mentioned the importance of changing our perspective on the things that we're focused on right now. So I could go at length talking about how harmful data centers are and how emerging technology is destroying the planet. But honestly, I'm not really interested in fighting against oligarchs and big tech companies, because why would they listen to me? So instead today, I'm going to explore what it actually looks like if we build technology when we put people and planet first and emerging technology second. So let's get into it. So what is the current state of play when it comes to technology and the environment? So as someone who sits in between these worlds of emerging technology and anthropology, I always have this weird discomfort when I hear people talk about tech, or on the flip side, when I hear about people talk about climate action. Because if you're a tech person, it's really awkward because we have tech CEOs making decisions that impact entire societies. And then on the other side, our natural environment is being pushed past its limits, and not just because of technology, but because of this long-held belief that the Earth is simply a resource bank that we get to draw from without consequence. And then there's this human side of all of this, where we are neglecting our own needs. So people are becoming stretched, communities are disconnected, and many people feel increasingly removed from the decisions that is shaping our lives. And I could continue talking about all of the negatives here and see them all as separate issues. The challenges around technology, our environment, and our society. But they aren't separate conversations. They are all part of the same one, and they always have been. And what has always frustrated me about the way that these conversations happen publicly is that everything becomes this or that. But as we explore in our episode on the art of perception, what we focus on can trap us if we're looking at the problem from the wrong perspective. So for me, the actual question isn't whether should we continue developing these new technologies, because I think we will. I think the question is whether we are willing to design them inside a set of values that recognize the world that we want to enter into and create spaces for people who will live alongside them to also have a say. But right now, I think the honest answer is that sometimes we're moving in that direction, but often people don't feel like they actually have the power or agency to participate in these conversations. So since the scientific era took hold of the Western world in the 16th century, we began treating ourselves as separate from nature. We somehow drew this line where humans were over there and the environment was somewhere over there. And the environment became something to extract from, convert and consume. And that worldview built the industrial economy, but it also brought us to where we are today, where the natural systems are under enormous strain and where many of our decisions affecting billions of people are made by a small number of actors. So the system that we have inherited was not designed around balance or equity. And now AI is also being built within that same system, which means without deliberate intervention, it risks depending on the same imbalances we are already seeing. Because technology doesn't emerge separately from culture. It inherits the values, assumptions, and structures of the societies that create it. And if you caught our very first episode on how to build ethical AGI, you'll know my concerns about creating technology under the same social pressures we are experiencing today. Because in my opinion, and my concern, is that we're building a parentified daughter into the code. So something that we expect to be intelligent, adaptive, and increasingly responsible, while also placing it within a system that is designed around our own unresolved challenges. And we're already beginning to see the first signs of those cracks forming, which is why I will always continue coming back to the same point. The only way forward is ensuring that there is community consensus around how we are building and managing these technologies. And that's why this conversation matters right now. Not when the infrastructure is already within the ground, and not when we stumble into an AGI that carries the weight of our unresolved problems, and not when our oceans are too warm to sustain life. It has to be now while it's still being shaped. But if we want to take a look into the future, you know that we have to take a look back in time to notice the patterns. So I want to take you back to what inspired all of this for me. So years ago, back in 2019, when I was first developing the idea for the water project, I actually had the privilege of seeing Jane Goodall speak in person. And I remember sitting there thinking that this is someone who hasn't just changed science, but she changed the way that we saw ourselves. And in many ways, that moment became the beginning of my mission I'm on today. And it reminded me that being human and being part of the natural world and the tools that we create have never been separate stories. They are so deeply connected, and they always have been. But this story really begins back in the 1960s, when Jane Goodall was observing chimpanzees in Gombe National Park in Tanzania. So one day when she was watching a chimp strip the leaves from a twig and used it to extract termites from a mound, it was just this simple observation, but it completely disrupted how science understood what it meant to be human. And up until that point, one of the most defining characteristics of humanity was actually our ability to make and use tools. But suddenly that line wasn't clear anymore. And there's this very famous quote attributed to Louis Leakey after Goodall made her discovery. He said, "Now we must redefine the tool, redefine man, or accept chimpanzees as humans." And I love that quote because it really does show us what happens when reality doesn't quite fit into the nice little categories that we've built around ourselves. And what fascinates me about that moment isn't that the chimpanzees use tools, it's that an entire scientific worldview had to shift because one person paid close enough attention to notice something that didn't fit the story that we've been telling ourselves. So science didn't change because one person argued louder, it changed because someone observed the world as it really was. And I think that we're standing at a very similar moment today. As emerging technologies become more capable, we're finding ourselves asking many of the same questions again. What is intelligence? What is creativity? What is work? What does it mean to be human? It is this entire podcast. But I also think that there is another question sitting underneath all of this, and it's one that we don't ask enough. What kind of relationship do we want these technologies to have with the living systems they're emerging into? Because one of the things that Goodall understood so intuitively was that you don't separate the chimpanzee from the forest. She wasn't simply observing an animal using a tool. She was observing a relationship between a species, its environment, its community, and the behaviors that allowed it to survive. And none of these things made sense in isolation because they had evolved together. And anthropology teaches us something very similar. Human evolution has never happened separately from the environment. So every major shift in history has emerged through our relationship with the world around us. New tools changed us, but so did changing climates, landscapes, food systems, and the communities built around them. We didn't evolve by conquering our environment. We evolved by responding to it. And that's why, to me, this moment feels so significant, because emerging technology isn't arriving in this empty space. It's emerging into existing ecological systems, social systems, economies, and cultures. So the question isn't simply whether these technologies will become more capable, because they will. The more important question is whether or not we're paying attention to the systems that they're becoming a part of, or whether we're only paying attention to the technology itself. Because history has shown us that the moments that change civilization aren't just about new inventions. They're about a new way of seeing. So what are my futuristic insights telling me about this relationship between technology, our environment, and ourselves? So if history is asking us to rethink the relationship between humans, technology, and the natural world, so what might the future actually look like? So when I was at university studying anthropology, my favorite classes were always the ones where no one really agreed with each other. And these were typically the evolution classes as well. So these lecture halls, the ones where we were talking about evolution, these usually had to hold both science students and our humanities students. And when you have these science kids mixed with these humanity kids, they're all trying to answer the same question from completely different backgrounds and understandings of the world. Something interesting always seemed to happen because the scientists brought the evidence, the philosophers brought the meaning, and the anthropologists brought context. So no one had the complete picture on their own, but together we often arrived somewhere that I don't think we could get to individually. And I think that's where we're heading. So for a long time, we've treated technology as an engineering problem. If something wasn't working, we build a better tool. And if something becomes more efficient, we call it progress. But the technologies we're creating now don't just solve technical problems anymore. They're reshaping our economies, our communities, our ecosystems, and even the way that we understand ourselves. Which means engineering alone isn't enough. The future belongs to those who can actually think across systems and not just within disciplines. And one of the things that I find most exciting about this next era is that I don't think we'll measure technological progress in quite the same way that we have for the last 200 years. I don't think progress will simply be about faster processes, larger models, or more automation. I think we'll begin asking different questions. Is this technology regenerative or extractive? Does it strengthen communities or weaken them? Does it increase resilience or dependency? And does it leave the ecosystems around it healthier than it was before? So those feel like environmental questions, but I do feel like they can become technical ones because nature has spent billions of years refining systems that are adaptive, resilient, and remarkably efficient. So forests don't optimize a single tree at the expense of the entire ecosystem. Rivers don't move in straight lines because they're trying to be efficient. They find pathways to sustain movement over time. And living systems don't simply maximize growth, they balance growth with stability, diversity, and regeneration. So imagine if we designed emerging technologies with the same principles in mind. Instead of asking how quickly we can scale technology, perhaps we could be asking how well it integrates with the communities and environments it's entering. So instead of measuring success purely through productivity and profit, perhaps we begin measuring whether technology contributes to the long-term health of the systems around it. And this is one of the reasons why I find Doughnut Economics so compelling. Not because it's simply an economic model, but because it starts with a different question. How do we create society where everyone has enough to thrive without pushing beyond the ecological boundaries that allows us to thrive in the first place? And perhaps one of the most biggest shifts that we'll be seeing in the next couple of decades. So emerging technology will stop being designed in isolation and start being designed as part of living systems, where engineers will work alongside ecologists, anthropologists alongside roboticists, and indigenous knowledge holders alongside data scientists. Not because diversity of disciplines is fashionable, but because I think that the problems that we're trying to solve have become so interconnected for any one perspective to solve alone. And the technologies that endure won't simply be the most intelligent. They'll be the ones who know how to exist within this relationship. Because ultimately, I don't think the next era of technology is asking us to become more artificial. I think it's asking us to become more ecological, to remember that every technology we create becomes part of the environment, our cultures, and our communities that surround it. And if that's true, then perhaps the real innovation of the next century won't be artificial intelligence, quantum computing, or biotechnology. Perhaps it will be our ability to design all of those technologies in a way that leaves the world healthier than we found it. And of course, if you want more information on our own North Star of building the future, you can read more in our future-facing white paper. It's linked below. So if this is the future that we want to build, where technology sits inside ecological reality rather than pretending to float above it, what do we actually need to do today in order to build it? So for individuals, my ask today is this. The most useful thing you can do right now is become more informed about the physical footprint of digital technology. And this is because knowledge creates agency. So when you understand that AI systems use water and that minerals from your devices come from somewhere on the earth, you have to start asking different questions as a consumer, as a voter, and as someone who talks to other people. So one action is to find one piece of infrastructure that you rely on. It could be your cloud storage, your energy provider, or your phone manufacturer. And just look into their environmental commitments. It's just a simple start. It's just about being knowledgeable. And a second action is if you feel like something is wrong about the technology that is being built in your community, say so. Show up to public consultation, sign something, contact somebody. Community voice only works if people use it. And if people in your environment aren't listening, build community and start there. And remember, things that change society the most aren't always the ones with the loudest voice. And again, taking advice from Jane Goodall, we have to sit at the table and listen. But sharing stories from the heart can actually help change people's minds. So instead of fighting against people, meet them at the heart. That's how you actually make change. And for builders and founders, this is my ask for you. So if you are building something within this space, any kind of technology that has a physical footprint, the time to define your environmental boundaries is before you scale and not after. Not because regulation will eventually force you to, but because the systems built inside clear values are more resilient than systems that have been retrofitted later. So one practical action is to actually run your project through a Doughnut Economics lens. So ask yourself what the social flaw you're committed to. So who does this serve and how? Ask what ecological ceiling you're working within. So what resources does this use? And what's your commitment to using them responsibly? So understand all of those thresholds and the boundaries and find the safe and just zone between those. That's where you build. And another action is bring at least one non-technical voice into your design process early. It could be an ecologist, a community member, someone whose job is not to build the thing, but to understand what the thing lands within, and for organizations and decision makers. So the conversation about AI and emerging technologies' environmental impact is happening whether you're in it or not. And the organizations that will lead into the next era are the ones who will get ahead of this rather than respond to it under pressure. So one action, make your AI and tech infrastructure visible internally. Audit what you're using, what it costs environmentally, and where it comes from. So invisible infrastructure escapes accountability, but it's not enough. And the next action is to build participatory processes into how you make technology decisions. Try saying that 10 times. So before you approve any significant infrastructure investment, ask who else should be in the room and who it impacts. So perhaps this conversation has never really been about the technology at all, and if it's good or bad. I think it's how we form relationships between things. The relationships between people and the natural world, between communities and the systems that shape their lives, and ultimately the relationship we choose to have with the technologies that we are creating. Because technology has never existed outside of nature. It's never existed outside of society. Every tool that we build enters into an existing world, and in doing so, that changes the world. So the question is whether we're designing them in ways that strengthen the systems around it or slowly undermine them. So Jane Goodall reminds us that tools have never been uniquely human, and perhaps the next era of tech asks us to bring those ideas all together to build technologies that don't simply become more intelligent, but become better neighbors within the systems that they're entering. And of course, there is another thread running through all of this that leads us to bioregionalism. So this is the idea that regenerations begin where people and place meet, how that reshapes governance, food systems, water, energy, and ultimately the way that we think about the future itself. And of course, I can do another deep dive on that because it is what I do best. But until then, I will leave you with one question. So if technology that we build reflects the values of society that created it, what values do we want the future to inherit? And this isn't just for the next generation or for the next 100 years, but what do we actually want humanity to evolve into? What goes beyond Homo sapien? And a reminder that these decisions that we make today won't just impact us as humanity, but they also impact the animal kingdom, the plant kingdom, and our friends that live in the ocean, and perhaps even beyond. But if today's episode got you thinking, you can come and join your journey with us. We post nearly every day on Instagram, sharing our insights and inspiration for founders and future-facing leaders. It's a good place to stay curious. And if you're ready to go deeper, you can head over to our website at robinsonhewitt.com. We work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and future systems thinking to help future-facing leaders, founders, and organizations transform, evolve, and build the next era. If you're still orienting, we have so many free resources available on our website to help you on your own founder's journey. But if you're ready to take the leap, you can check out our services as well. Make sure to subscribe to help build a better future for everybody. Everything is linked below, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao.